Kellen Moore is the new offensive coordinator in Philadelphia. This is why this is important. Think about some of the league's heaviest pre-snap motion teams and their wide receivers in fantasy football. Okay, now imagine Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown in similar roles, specifically Devonta Smith in that slot role. I mean, do not sleep on Devonta Smith. Every year, the biggest advantage you can have over your league mates is understanding the changes in the NFL from one year to the next. That could be a coaching change. That could be new players arriving to a team, players departing from a team. It all matters. For example, last year, the Packers had the second most vacated targets heading into the 2023 season. They had a new starter in Jordan Love instead of Aaron Rodgers. Then they decided to spend a second-round pick on Jaden Reed. A ton of changes in that organization, and ultimately some very exciting opportunities. Those who bet on a late-round Jaden Reed at wide receiver 74 were well rewarded. They were happy on understanding that change. Second change, how about the Texans last year? They drafted C.J. Stroud in the first round, and previously they had started Davis Mills for a couple years. If you saw that draft pick and you said, you know what if C.J. Stroud is actually good? You bet on some Texans wide receivers late in your fantasy drafts, you were well rewarded, right? Nico Collins as a wide receiver 58, Tank Dell as a wide receiver 78 in ADP in 2023. Another change in 2023 was Sean Payton became the head coach of the Denver Broncos and ultimately the play caller in Denver. And while there wasn't much fantasy success, we were expecting the Broncos to target the running back position heavily. Why? Because that's what Sean Payton did all his years in New Orleans, and ultimately the Broncos did lead all teams in the NFL in targets to the running back position with 153. So while there wasn't a good offense there were signs to believe that running backs would be heavily targeted. These little details could be the difference between you winning and losing your fantasy leagues. So let's talk about 10 of the most important changes this offseason that will impact fantasy football. Number 1. The Tennessee Titans offense will look completely different in 2024, all right? Out with Mike Vrabel, out with Derrick Henry, those guys who have been the faces of the franchise for the last 4 or 5 years. They have now brought in Brian Callahan, the offensive coordinator from the Bengals last year. They brought in Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, Tyler Boyd. They drafted J.C. Latham, a tackle, in the first round. All signs point towards this offense doing a complete 180 in their identity, right? From a run to a pass-focused team. Under Mike Vrabel last year, the Titans had the 7th highest rush rate and the 7th lowest pass rate, right? Makes sense. This is via Robbie Green from NFELO Analytics. They also ran 3 wide receiver sets just 55% of the time under Mike Vrabel. That was the 7th lowest in the league, and that's according to Summer Sports Statistics. Now, let's look at what Brian Callahan's offense looked like last year. And technically, Sean Taylor called plays, but he was a big part of that offense. So the Bengals last year had the 3rd lowest run rate, the 3rd highest passing rate, right? And they ran 3 wide receiver sets or 11 personnel 74% of the time, which was the 4th highest mark in the NFL. So this team is going to be completely different this year compared to what you're used to seeing. And I think there could be some steals at ADP in Tennessee. Like, for example, Calvin Ridley, who's priced as wide receiver 32. DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 38. Tajay Spears at running back 35. Insane to me. Those guys are priced very respectfully. And this offense could be very good. It could be a huge turnaround compared to what we're seeing. Don't pass on the Tennessee Titans because you're thinking about what their offense used to look like. The second change you need to know is Arthur Smith is the new play caller for the Pittsburgh Steelers, all right? The Falcons offense under Arthur Smith last year, the 2nd highest run rate. Only the 49ers ran at a higher rate than the Falcons last year. And by far, this is crazy, by far ran the fewest 3 wide receiver sets in the NFL at 15%. Guys, the next closest team was the Niners, who ran a 3 wide receiver set in 38% of their plays. 15% is just ridiculously low, right? But this is the offense that we're likely going to see in Pittsburgh. The Falcons' rushing attempts under Arthur Smith in the last 2 years, they were 4th and 2nd highest in the NFL, both years averaging over 30 rushing attempts per game. I think Najee Harris is reasonably priced, but I believe Jaylen Warren is a huge steal at ADP right now based off of these changes. They're going to run the ball a lot. That offensive line is very set up to rush the ball successfully. So Jaylen Warren at RB30 is a huge steal in my opinion. All right, the third thing that you need to know is Chris Godwin is moving back into the slot for 2024. All right, last year was the first time in the last 5 years that Godwin averaged over 60 receiving yards and 7 targets per game, but finished outside the top 15 in fantasy points per game, right? He's been so good for so long. So what happened? Well, for the first time in the last 5 years, the Bucs decided to play Chris Godwin as a primarily outside alignment wide receiver. He played out wide 61.6% of the time, which to be honest makes little to no sense at all because we've seen Chris Godwin be so impressive out of the slot. If you look at his career, he's primarily played in the slot. Why did they make that change? It makes no sense. It led to his lowest catch percentage since 2019. He's always been a very reliable receiver. But here's the good news. The Bucs have made it extremely clear that Godwin will play in the slot in 2024, which should bring back some more reliable fantasy success. The fourth change that you need to know is the entire Seahawks staff has changed, all right? Pete Carroll's gone. Mike McDonald's in. Shane Waldron's gone. Ryan Grubb is in as the offensive coordinator. If you don't know Ryan Grubb is a former Washington Huskies head coach, and he has talked about how excited he is to open up the passing game in Seattle. They want to pass the ball a lot more. He's talked about specifically JSN, how they want to get him involved. Keep in mind, Ryan Grubb helped Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan all get drafted before round 3 in the NFL draft this year, and that his offense also led to Michael Penix Jr. getting drafted top 10. The Washington Huskies last year, amongst 130 plus Power 5 schools, ranked first in passing yards per game. They ranked 12th in passing attempts per game and 9th in total touchdowns per game. I heavily anticipate JSN's role growing this year, and I think overall this offense is going to be very more focused on the passing game, right? I think JSN is a huge steal at his ADP. Same with Lockett. I would not discount Zach Charbonnet and Noah Fant this year. All right, the fifth change that you need to know is the Chargers offense will look completely different, right? It's like we're talking about the Titans, but in reverse. All right, they're going to go from one of the most pass-happy teams in the league to one of the most rush-friendly offenses in the league, right? During Jim Harbaugh's time as a head coach in the NFL for the 49ers, which was 2011 to 2014, San Francisco was a top 5 rushing volume offense in the NFL 3 out of those 4 seasons. And on average, they averaged over 30 rushing attempts per game. Now, Jim Harbaugh's new offensive coordinator is Greg Roman. Greg Roman was the offensive coordinator for the Ravens from 2019 to 2022. And Baltimore was top 3 in rushing volume in 3 out of those 4 seasons. Again, every year, Greg Roman was the offensive coordinator in Baltimore, averaging well over 30 rushing attempts per game. And then they decided to draft a generational tackle in Joe Alt this year in the first round. I think this team is going to overall be a much better offense than people expect. Like, I think you can legitimately say every single player at ADP is a steal for the Chargers, right? Justin Herbert, a steal for the Chargers. Ladd McConkey, the rookie receiver. Josh Palmer, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal. Like, across the board, the Chargers, I don't think there's a single player that's overpriced in my personal opinion. All right, the sixth change you've got to know is everything in New England has changed, right? Bill Belichick's out. They got a new GM. Bill Belichick's out. They got a new head coach in Gerard Mayo. Bill O'Brien is gone. One of the worst offenses in the NFL last year. He was replaced by Alex Van Pelt. The quarterback situation has changed, right? Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi are out. We've got Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. And really, the only question I want to ask you guys is, what if Drake May is good? Like, ask yourself that question right now. What if Drake May is actually really good? Like, could he be this year's surprise CJ Stroud, rookie, where he comes out the gates firing and he has really good wide receivers around him because of that? Remember, the people who took a shot, like we said, on the Houston wide receivers last year were well rewarded. Look at how cheap they were. But I think this year I'm going to take so much Jalen Polk in my fantasy drafts. At wide receiver 72, it is a no-brainer to draft Jalen Polk. He's currently being tagged as the wide receiver 1 out of camp. I also love Demario Douglas, Javon Baker, and I think Hunter Henry is also very, very sneaky as a pass catcher for the New England Patriots. We're going to get into the next 4 points that we got to talk about, but I want to let you know, you do not need to wait until September to play fantasy football. We're playing fantasy football right now over on underdogfantasy.com. If you haven't signed up yet, use a promo code LAND. That will get you 50% deposit matched up to $250, meaning you can get $125 free dollars just by using our promo code. They got great tournaments over there, real money, real pots on the line, but they also have player props. So if you like to bet like the higher or lower on specific stats for players across all sports, they've got that. They got special pick'ems sometimes, like just recently they had with the Olympics, LeBron James over under 0.5 points, just a very easy way to get the ball rolling for you so you can 5x, 10x, 20x your money. So check out the pinned comment if you'd like to get some free money from using our promo code and have some fun. All right. The seventh thing that you absolutely need to know is Kellen Moore is the new offensive coordinator in Philadelphia. According to FantasyLife.com, this is crazy, all right? According to FantasyLife.com, over the last 2 seasons, the Eagles have been the most stationary offense in the NFL, ranking dead last in motion at the snap at 30%. Last season, Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator for the Chargers, and the Chargers ranked 6th. 59% of the time they had motion at the snap. And let's add another source to it just to back it up double time. Seth Walder of ESPN confirms again that the Eagles were dead last in motion at snap in 2023. And Keenan Allen was in motion 28% of his routes, which was the second highest mark of any wide receiver in the NFL with over 100 targets. The season before that, Keenan was in motion just 14% of the time. And here's what Kellen Moore had to say about his plans for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith moving around in his offense. He said, I think those guys are going to move throughout the game and throughout each and every week. I want you guys to take a second, all right? This is why this is important. Think about some of the league's heaviest pre-snap motion teams and their wide receivers in fantasy football. Okay, the Dolphins were number 1 in pre-snap motion. The Rams, the Niners, the Packers, the Lions. Who were their wide receivers for fantasy, right? Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Jaden Reed, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now imagine Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown in similar roles, specifically Devonta Smith in that slot role. I mean, do not sleep on Devonta Smith. A.J. Brown's a locked and loaded round 1 pick, but Devonta Smith should be an easy pick for you in fantasy drafts this year. I promise you, he is a great pick. All right, the 8th thing you need to know. Pete Carmichael is out as the offensive coordinator in New Orleans, and Clint Kubiak is in. Pete Carmichael was a Saints offensive coordinator from 2009 to 2023, 22 years as the offensive coordinator there. I mean, some of you guys watching this are probably not even over 22 years old. Holy hell, that makes me feel really old. But clearly they needed a change in New Orleans. Pete Carmichael, when he lost Sean Payton, when he lost Drew Brees, he lost his touch. They bring in Clint Kubiak, who in 2023 was a passing game coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. And the 49ers in 2023 did incredibly well at scheming up the easy ways to get their best players the ball, right? Deebo, Ayuk, and Chris Olave this year should be schemed up as an alpha and given the ball in very easy, simple ways, right? The offense should funnel through him. If you look at designed target rate in 2023, so the percentage of their targets that were designed, Deebo was at 19.3%, again, in that Clint Kubiak offense. You have other big names I just wanted to show you as references, like Amon-Ra at 13%, Tyreek at 17%, and then Chris Olave at 6.6%. For him being such an obvious target for them, they should have made it a lot easier to get him the ball, and I believe that that's what Clint Kubiak will do here in 2024. All right, the 9th thing you need to know is the Panthers hired an offensive guru and Dave Canales as their head coach. The same guy who helped Baker Mayfield revive his career in 2023, the same guy who helped Geno Smith revive his career in 2022. This entire offseason has been focused around rebuilding this offense and helping Bryce Young. Jonathan Brooks was brought in. Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, they improved the offensive line through free agency. Do not be surprised if the Panthers are a better offense than people are expecting. And I think just like the Chargers, there is value across the board for fantasy football, right? Deontay Johnson, one of my favorite picks. Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard, all easy picks for me to make personally in fantasy football. And the last thing you got to know is the Washington Commanders are a completely different team. They're a completely different team from top to bottom. The owner is different from 2022 to 2024. The GM is now Adam Peters. The head coach is now Dan Quinn. The offensive coordinator is now Cliff Kingsbury, and their quarterback is now Jaden Daniels. If you look at Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona his offenses led the league in no huddle rate and neutral game pace, two things that are very friendly to good fantasy quarterbacks and good fantasy offenses. If you look at Kyler Murray, remember his rookie season in 2019, he was coached by Cliff Kingsbury. And as a rookie, he was able to average over 18 points per game and had 4 rushing touchdowns with over 500 rushing yards. Kyler then goes on to have two seasons where he averaged over 22 points per game under Cliff and had another season with 10 rushing touchdowns. Do not be surprised if Jaden Daniels comes out of the gate being one of the best picks in fantasy this year. The ideal number 1 late round quarterback target is Jaden Daniels for me. And I think everyone's a steal at ADP. Terry McLaurin, Dotson, Brian Robinson, Eckler. These are all very good picks in fantasy this year. And I will just finish off the video with an honorable mention. That's the Atlanta Falcons. The reason I didn't cover the Atlanta Falcons in depth is because I feel like the fantasy community has already adjusted to the changes that they've had, right? They brought in Kirk Cousins, whole new coaching staff. Arthur Smith is gone. But the reality is we've already adjusted in fantasy. Like Bijan Robinson's the RB3 in ADP. Drake London's the wide receiver 12. I think if anything, Kyle Pitts is like the number 1 guy that is being disrespected in this offense. But overall, I think we all understand that change by now. So that's everything you need to know, guys. That's everything you need to know. These are crucial changes that will heavily impact fantasy football, and they should help you identify really good picks that people are overthinking because of what they previously thought of these NFL teams. So do me a favor, smash that like button to show some love, subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys soon. All up. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.